And we're back with a special roundtable discussion this morning. Joining me now, presidential historian Doris Kearns Goodwin, host of MSNBC's Andrea Mitchell Reports, our chief foreign affairs correspondent Andrea Mitchell, Democratic Mayor of Newark, New Jersey, Cory Booker, former Republican Senator Chuck Hagel of Nebraska, and joining us for his first appearance on the program, Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger. See, I didn't mess up the name, even though you thought I might have. Illinois' 11th
it's
district.
Adam Kinzinger, but that's all.
Oh, what did I say? I'm sorry.
It is my first time here.
He was elected in 2010 with the Tea Party support and served as a captain in the Air Force, including tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. Congressman, welcome very much.
Thank you.
Happy to have you, and welcome to everyone. Doris, sometimes satire can be the most damning in terms of summing up where we are. And the Onion newspaper, the satirical newspaper, has this headline this week. Headline: Congress continues debate over whether or not nation should be economically ruined. If the question is whether Washington is broken, make the case that the answer is yes.
I think there's no question it's broken. You know, our country was created on the principle of compromise. Think about it: the states versus the federal government, Senate versus House, North versus South. And somehow, I remember once one of the old framers was asked, what are the three principles of this new government you created? Well, the first is compromise, the second is compromise, the third is compromise. Something's happened where compromise has become a terrible word in Washington. It's partly because the parties have become more ideologically separated. Henry Clay was the great compromiser. Lincoln's idol was Henry Clay. Now a lot of people feel that you're undoing your convictions. What do you go to Washington for unless you're trying to work out solutions? Solutions in a diverse country like ours is going to require compromise. And I don't see any of that attitude there. And I think the kind of people who come to Washington now don't want to do that. And it's only going to make it worse because the caliber of people gets less.
Congressman, you know, you're new to Washington. Is this what you expected? Is this how it should operate?
No, it's not how it should operate. I mean, I think Washington, there's no doubt that it's broken. There's no doubt that there's, you know, it's become personal. It's become vitriolic and acidic. People need to work together. We need to have these discussions. And I think the American people would be pretty impressed with the kind of discussions that, frankly, Republicans and Democrats have. We get along behind the scenes, you know. But I'll tell you what really gets, I feel like that the Republicans in the House have come to the table. We've said, look, the overspending of Congresses prior to us, of our president, has brought us to a point where we need to recognize that, you know, yeah, we probably have to pay for that by raising the debt ceiling. However, we've got to get ourselves on a fiscal trajectory. Think about it. The amount of cuts that we're talking about making in 10 years is almost equivalent to what we spent in 10 minutes in the stimulus in 2009. So we have to have a reduction.
Senator Hagel, Norm Ornstein wrote a piece in Foreign Policy on Thursday, kind of summing up again that case against Washington working, and he writes this. The headline: Americans have complained for years that the government is broken. This time they're right. Look at what we've got now: a long-term debt disaster with viable bipartisan solutions on the table but ignored or cast aside in Congress, an impasse over the usually perfunctory matter of raising the statutory debt limit, placing the United States in jeopardy of its first ever default, sniping and guerrilla warfare over two major policy steps enacted in the last Congress: health care reform and financial regulation, no serious action or movement on climate change, jobs, or the continuing mortgage crisis, and major trade deals stalled yet again despite bipartisan and presidential support.
Well, I think where you start is with this fact. At least I believe this. Politics just reflects society. And what we are seeing today, I believe, is a new emerging governing coalition being built in this country, a new political center of gravity. Evidence of that abounds. Start with Gallup's numbers on registered independents. Registered independents now represent more than 40% of all the registered voters in America. Republicans think like a rock, Democrats think like a rock, and you can bolster that argument in many, many ways. Point being, we are living at a time when society is the most complicated, interconnected, immediate we've ever seen. That also reflects on a world order that is being rebuilt. We haven't seen a world order being rebuilt since World War II. Really, the implosion of the Soviet Union in 1991 started it. So obviously what's happening in Washington is going to reflect what's happening across this country and the world. The emergence of the Tea Party, for example, whatever that is, a philosophy about government, that was born out of frustration, a disappointment, high expectations in your leaders. To Doris's point, you're supposed to come to Washington to help govern, find solutions, solve problems. We're not seeing that. This didn't start, by the way, with this president. I saw this in the Senate emerging over the last 12 years. Both parties are to blame. We have, I think, a vacuum of some leadership, of some courage. Courage has never been an abundant commodity in Washington. But we're going to blow through this, David. I do believe that. And the last point I'd make, look at the last 3 elections in this country. We're not a republic that swings wildly. Last 3 elections, back to back, threw parties out of power in those elections. What does that tell you? That tells you that the board of directors, the people who own the country, the citizen, the voter, is going to take action.
Andrea Mitchell, I mean, look at our polling that shows that 52% of Republicans say their leaders should stick to their convictions. Something like 60% of Democrats say there should be compromises. There's the political divide.
Exactly. I was really struck by a cartoon this week that had the leaders of Iraq and Afghanistan, Maliki and Karzai, looking at our debt ceiling debate and saying, do you think they'll ever be ready for democracy? You know, the fact is that we've got people who've been elected, House members have been elected in gerrymandered, much more partisan districts. They're more worried about being challenged in the primary than running against a Democrat. You've got both caucuses now much more ideological because the centrist Democrats were defeated in the last round. So this whole thing fell apart. John Boehner and Barack Obama could probably have come together on something. They could not lead their caucuses. And Boehner is a different kind of speaker. He has not the ability or the desire to go out and say, this is the deal, my way or the highway. You're not going to get on this committee, you're not going to get on that, you're not going to have a good office. The old enforcement mechanisms, as much as we dislike them and used to criticize them, they worked. Leaders could demand fellowship.
Yeah,
here, there was an exile of
Let me get Mayor Booker into this. What do you see from the outside?
Well, you know, there's a dam of disgust that's welling up in this country where people feel like their politics is betraying them. And most Americans, frankly, don't think of themselves first as Democrats or Republicans. They think of themselves as Americans. And they are frustrated by the partisanship being put before progress, by parties being put before pragmatism. And so my hope is, as the sound of Senator Hagel's the sound of optimism, is that this is the beginning of a welling up in this nation where we're going to start to reject the kind of politics that's not serving.
But Doris, you talked about the historical parallels, and Congressman, you mentioned it as well, how personal it's gotten here. We actually had a reflection of that this week between Congressman Allen West from Florida and Debbie Wasserman Schultz, a fellow Florida Congresswoman and the chairman of the DNC. He wrote her an email after they had an exchange on the floor, and I'll put it up on the screen so our viewers can see. This is the email he wrote to her. Look, Debbie, I understand that after I departed the House floor, you directed your floor speech comments directly toward me. Let me make myself perfectly clear. You want a personal fight, I'm happy to oblige. You are the most vile, unprofessional, and despicable member of the U.S. House of Representatives. If you have something to say to me, stop being a coward and say it to my face. Otherwise, shut the heck up. You have proven repeatedly that you are not a lady, therefore shall not be afforded due respect from me, steadfast and loyal Congressman West. Does this make your head turn, or does this remind you of an earlier era?
Well, I'll tell you what, in the 19th century, a dozen congressmen were formally censured. They had to stand before the bar of the Congress for insulting, inoffensive remarks to fellow congressmen. Now what happens? They say these insulting remarks, and then suddenly they raise more money from their base. I mean,
and they both were doing that in this case.
One of the things that's happened, I mean, just to go back to Andrea's point for a minute about the Speaker not having the power, sometimes I yearn for the old days of Speaker Cannon, Joe Cannon. He had such power that at one point when he wanted a bill passed, he just said, okay, how many ayes? Very tepid response. How many nays? Thundering nay. Well, the nays make the most noise, but the ayes have it. I mean, you have a feeling with Boehner. He grew up with 11 brothers and sisters. He said compromise was in his DNA. He wanted to do this, you get this feeling, if he and the president could have made it. But one of the things that's happening in Congress now, too, is they're there from Tuesdays to Thursday. They're not there on the weekends. They don't socialize. They don't form friends, even between Tea Party and non-Tea Party, as well as Republicans and Democrats. We've lost that camaraderie that is the core of what our system is about.
Let me just say to that, you know, look, I think when we talk about what's the future of this country, where are we going, where's politics, America is the best country in the world. We refuse to accept second. My grandfather fought in World War II, and I remember him in tears when he tried to recount his experiences just before he died. He couldn't do it. I think of the generations from the men who signed the Declaration of Independence that said this is going to cost us our life, but we're going to do it, and the generations of people like Senator Hagel who fought, like when I was in Iraq and Afghanistan and the people I fought with, the investment we've made in this country, we refuse to fail. I absolutely refuse to say that this is something we can't do, that we're accepting second best. Right. America is the greatest country in the world.
But my question, Congressman, is compromise failing? Because that's what seems to be the underlying trend here, is that any give well, let's put it this way. Compromise is not celebrated in the way that Doris said it was in the past.
I don't think compromise is failing. I think when we sit around and say Washington's broken, it's never going to get better, and I'm not saying that's what we're saying here, but that's failing by taking that and saying, well, it's just broken. We're going to have to accept our place in history. No, we can come to a compromise, and as I said, truly there is a feeling in my caucus, and in me specifically, I can say, that I feel like we are willing to compromise by coming to the table and saying, okay, we understand that we're going to have to raise the debt limit specifically, but we have to get ourselves on a fiscal trajectory because, look, we've spent too much money. We have the same tax rates, the same two wars, the same prescription drug benefit that we had in 2007, but the deficit in 2007 was $161 billion. This year it's $1.5 trillion.
I mean, this is the question, I guess, Senator Hagel. Is this extreme principle, or is this a form of taking an issue and using that issue to say, you know, absolutely no give, no matter whether there's a crisis looming financially or not?
Well, first, democracies can only work through consensus. There is no way it can work in any other form or fashion. Doris talked about it. Second, there's another dynamic to this too, David, we haven't touched on yet, and that is that we are trapped in a 20th century government structure trying to deal with 21st century challenges, issues, and problems. And you can take down all the committees and all the dynamics and the rules in the House and the Senate and so on. The fact is we've got an institutional problem as well as a personal problem. The only other thing I would say about consensus and compromise, Doris again mentioned this. When you look back in the history of this country, as John McCain once said, politics is not beanbag. And it's been rough. It's been rougher actually than when we've seen it today, quite frankly. It's just more immediate today. There are more cable television channels. There are more pundits. There are more people who think they know everything about everything. And that's one of the big differences. Now, that doesn't dismiss or excuse what happened between that exchange that you showed on the TV. But consensus is absolutely essential if we're to move this country along.
And I'm sorry, I'm a little disgusted and a little angry because I see what's going on every day. We have a situation where Rome, our capital, is fiddling with itself while the nation is burning. And we talk about our grandparents' generation during crises, during the Great Depression. We built the Hoover Dam, Empire State Building. And here I see in my cities around America and mine, infrastructure is crumbling all around us. We are a nation that in that generation said, you know, we're going to go to the moon and we're going to do math and science and make sure that our kids are prepared to go there. But right now, what's happening? Nations are passing us in droves. Over 8 different countries now have a higher proportion of people graduating from college than we do. So we're all, again, our central capital is fooling around on issues that are perfunctory, as you said. Meanwhile, we're lacking what's best about America, what has made this nation strong in generations past, is our courage to take on the tough issues, to plot a course, and to push our nation to the front of the global context. And this is what America's hungering for, not these party debates, but a larger vision. And the Republicans are right, and I'm the first Democrat to say that we have a nation that is drowning in debt. We've seen this in New Jersey as us racking up entitlements that we cannot afford to pay for. We have to deal with these difficult problems, but we also have to do something that's going to inspire our country again to dream of who we can be in this nation, and that's not coming from Washington right now.
And it's sad to see our space program. I mean, we saw the last launch of the shuttle. But because of the kind of red ink that we're drowning in, we can't even really afford to go to space anymore.
But there are practical solutions. I mean, to see a Simpson-Bowles Commission come together and lay out some practical solutions, and as soon as it comes out, the left and the right both attack it for not.
And in fact, there is some criticism that is probably warranted, that the White House was pretty much silent on that. Simpson and Bowles came together. There was the Rivlin Group. There have been several documents, including the Gang of Six, although Democratic leaders in the Senate certainly viewed the Gang of Six coming out with another document this week as unhelpful because it changed the trajectory of the conversation.
Give Obama some credit, though. He's being attacked not just by the Republicans. He's being attacked by his own wing by standing up and saying, you know what, there's got to be a pragmatic principled center.
Well, now he is. I'm just saying that there was a moment there back when initially that commission would have had enforcement if Republicans hadn't bolted. So the president was left with the problem of creating a commission which had no enforcement mechanism, had no staffing, basically, and eventually did come out with a product which at least was a taking off point. The president did not jump in at that point, is the criticism. That said, the president and John Boehner now clearly are looking to independent swing voters, the healthy middle and disgusted middle of the country, and we're looking to try to bring their groups along, but they didn't have the power to try to get liberal/progressive Pelosi Democrats, however you want to phrase them, in the House to accept the really tough entitlement cuts up front. And more importantly, probably, John Boehner couldn't get the House.
Doris, let me ask you, I mean, the conversation also extends to if there's, if the left and the right are taking over, is there room in the center? You raised this when we were talking over the weekend. Tom Friedman, in his column in the New York Times today, has this as a headline: "Make way for the radical center. A third way is now on the way." Is it real? Does that really reflect where Americans are?
I think it does reflect it. I mean, I think Americans have a basic sense of fairness. They even did some study of our DNA that says as primates, we care about fairness, which is one reason why I think the country now is saying that Obama is speaking more to where the majority is by demanding both a combination of cuts and revenue increasement. But what you need then are people in the middle too often seem passive. They're defensive. You need passionate centrists. Somebody said to me, you need raging centrists. If somebody could come out and have the passion that Teddy Roosevelt had, he was absolutely in the center of the country. To the left of his Republican Party, to the right of the Republicans, he called for a square deal. Harry Truman called for a fair deal. That's what you need, people who are proud of being where that country is. The country's in the center, the country wants them. But too often, the people with the passion are on the left and the right, and the middle guys are trying to explain why we're in the middle.
Congressman, can I ask you one question? Sure. What about the dynamics in the House right now? There's a feeling, and there's been some interesting analysis about this, that for this freshman class right now, of which you are a part, you don't feel like you got there because of John Boehner. He's there because, in effect, Tea Party folks like yourself, or with those sentiments, sort of allowed him to be there, and he goes against that group at his peril. He can't bring them to the table to say, you will support this, because he knows that he's part of the establishment in many ways that you and your colleagues are bucking against. Does that create a dynamic where getting compromise is that much more difficult?
You know, I know that's kind of the feeling, but I can tell you, look, Speaker Boehner has been a good leader in saying, I want to hear what the sentiments are. I want to reflect. I mean, we have amendments to appropriations bill that were never allowed on the floor of the House of Representatives for the last number of years. It's an open process now. He really is open to saying, let the House work its will. He said it a number of times. But I can tell you, my allegiance is to the 11th Congressional District in Illinois, and I think the allegiance of the people that I've seen, you know, understand that they're representing their districts. Now, again, even within the freshman class, there's people on kind of all sides of everything. But that's what's great about this country, and we do have these discussions.
Senator Hagel, your former colleague, Alan Simpson, was part of the Deficit Commission when asked by Time Magazine whether he'd run again. You're out of this game, as is he. This is what he said. Would you run for office now, was the question. His response, oh, hell no. Now it's just sharp elbows, and instead of having a caucus where you sit down and say, what are you going to do for our country, you sit figuring out how to screw the other side. Would you join this party again?
I think Al has very eloquently stated the case, as he is wont to do. He's right. This is scripted politics. This is a scripted political dimension. Forum caucuses give the members talking points, and you don't stray far from the left or the right of your parties. You are actually penalized when you actually question your party or question your administration. I once said, and it got a lot of attention in a hearing regarding Iraq in the Foreign Relations Committee, if you did not want to make the tough choices and make the hard decisions and the tough votes, then go sell shoes. Well, I heard from all the shoe people, but I actually used to sell shoes. So it worked out all right. But that's the whole point. And until, you know, we can talk for hours and hours about this, but until you get back to the one common denominator, you come to Washington to make a better world, to govern, to compromise, make it happen. Not a political statement. That's the problem.
All right, but Mayor Booker, let me ask you this. For a lot of younger people, you know, who are looking at the political system and are disappointed, what is the way out of this? Because voters, the members of the public, have a real stake in actually changing this by creating more space for their elected officials to do the right thing. So what is that path out?
A few things. First of all, one of our presidents once said, there's nothing that's wrong with America that can't be cured by what's right with America. Right now, our nation is suffering from self-inflicted wounds. We are wounding ourselves by creating crises that do not have to exist. And so what we need, and what I hunger for from Washington, and this is why President Obama right now is exciting me, is leaders that are not going to just follow the polls, not going to just appeal to the sanctity and safety of their base, but willing to venture out and stand strong on principle, even if it means sacrificing political capital. That's what Washington needs. That's what America needs. And for young people who are considering getting into the game, they need to understand, number one, we get the government we deserve. We are a democracy.
All right, I'm going to get a quick break in here. We're going to come back with our trends and takeaways, a look at what was said here today and what to look for in the coming week. Plus, what are the hot political stories trending this morning? It's what we're talking about. It's right after this break.
You can't manufacture pride. But pride builds great cars. And you'll find it in the people at Toyota all across America who help create our vehicles. Like the Sienna, rolling off the line here in the U.S.
I have COPD. If you have it, you know how hard it can be to breathe and what that feels like. COPD includes chronic bronchitis and emphysema. Spiriva helps control my COPD symptoms by keeping my airways open a full 24 hours. Plus, it reduces COPD flare-ups. Spiriva is the only once-daily inhaled COPD maintenance treatment that does both, and it's steroid-free.
Spiriva does not replace fast-acting inhalers for sudden symptoms. Tell your doctor if you have kidney problems, glaucoma, trouble urinating, or an enlarged prostate. These may worsen with Spiriva. Discuss all medicines you take, even eye drops. Stop taking Spiriva and call your doctor right away if your breathing suddenly worsens, your throat or tongue swells, you get hives, vision changes or eye pain, or problems passing urine. Other side effects include dry mouth and constipation.
Nothing can reverse COPD. Spiriva helps me breathe better.
Breathing with COPD is no small thing. Ask your doctor about Spiriva.
We know why we're here. To chart a greener path in the air and in our factories.
To find cleaner, more efficient ways to power flight.
And harness our technology for new energy solutions.
Around the globe, the people of Boeing are working together to build a better tomorrow.
That's why we're here.
Monday on NBC Nightly News. Dressed for the weather or dressed for success? What's too casual to wear at work? Find out if your hot weather wardrobe could land you in hot water. NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams, Monday.
This is The Network, a network of possibilities. In here, TV follows you. And here, doctors see you before you get to the hospital. It's the AT&T network, and the planned combination with T-Mobile would deliver better service with thousands of new cell sites for greater access to all the things you want, whenever you want them.
WESH 2 News.
Local coverage from where you live.
Live, as it happened. Late breaking.
On air and online.
WESH 2 News is local, live, late breaking, non-stop weather and traffic on WESH 2 News Sunrise.
We're back with our final moments with our roundtable. First, our trends and takeaways. The news this morning, the top story this morning, of course, the ongoing debt talks. We spoke with the White House Chief of Staff, Bill Daley, also Senator Coburn, on whether a short-term deal is possible. This is what they said. The President would veto a plan if it does not extend the debt ceiling into 2013.
Yes, the President believes that we must get this uncertainty in order to help the American economy and help the American people.
First of all, I think that's a ridiculous position because that's what he's going to get presented with. That's the compromise way through that's going to build the compromise.
Still a stalemate here, Andrea.
I think there's going to be some compromise which will be shorter term than the President wants. They're going to have to agree with it. I don't understand how 236 members, by the way, sign a pledge of no taxes before they even start coming in to compromise. But there's going to have to be some shorter term deal that they're going to have to deal with.
As you know, every week we check in the conversation that's going on online as we're having our conversation here, and we checked in on Facebook. The question we asked folks there is, where do you think the debt talks go from here? We like Brian J., who said the quote attributed to Winston Churchill, Doris, you'll like this, will come true again. Quote, you can always count on Americans to do the right thing, after they've tried everything else. And to the trend tracker, the top political stories this morning, and you might imagine what we're talking about, the debt talks, number one going on this weekend. Also on the list, Representative Wu from Oregon. He's been accused of some unwelcome sexual advances toward a teenage girl. He met with Leader of the Democrats Pelosi over the weekend. This was said to be a daughter of a donor, a high school friend of Wu's. He is saying it was consensual. Still a lot of questions about this. He's coming back to Washington and to figure out some of his options. Also, General Saakashvili on the list at number 3, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, on this program 4 different times, and he has passed away. Certainly an important figure, Andrea.
A major figure, a Polish immigrant, 16 years old after World War II, comes and becomes the head of the Joint Chiefs and really helped with the Balkans War. One other quick point, why do we have a debt ceiling? We're the only major industrial country that does. Let's just get rid of the thing, people are saying. Only Denmark has a debt ceiling.
We may have time to take that issue up when we come back next week. Thank you all very much for a thoughtful discussion this morning. Before we go, on Monday we announced an exciting new partnership with Facebook. We're going to be teaming up for an innovative and interactive debate that I'll be moderating the Sunday before the New Hampshire Republican primary. And as the saying goes, all politics are local. But in this case, all politics are social. That's why we need you to be involved. So be sure to visit our Facebook page now, where you can suggest questions and your ideas for the debate, and check back as the date approaches for some other innovative ways you can participate. It's at www.facebook.com/meetthepress. That is all for today. We will be back next Sunday. If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.